Hello, Dagrothus here with a guide for Light Void Gauntlet Blunderbuss. This build is a ton of fun and it is absolutely unmatched for utility, especially when paired with other light assassins in a kill squad. It's similar to BBIG, but rather than going int for Ice Spike, we fully commit to pure Blunderbuss damage. This allows it to boast some of the highest burst damage in the game with the Grenade Shrapnel combo. Our secondary weapon is purely for utility. The Void Gauntlet is an incredibly good utility weapon. Simply pressing Oblivion can be a massive boost to your teammates' kill potential. To start, let's jump right into the attribute distribution. First off, we go 200 strength, as the Blunderbuss primarily scales off of strength, and we get this 200 strength perk, which gives plus 10% damage to stunned, slowed, and rooted enemies. This perk does not count towards the empower cap, so it is extremely good, especially because you can set up this 10% damage yourself via Netshot for the slow, or Scream for the root. Or you can simply play off of other people's CC, it's just free damage, it's a very good perk. Next up, we have 150 int to get plus 15% to elemental damage. This is essential, this is mandatory for Blunderbuss. It gives 15% damage on your main damaging abilities, which are Shrapnel Blast and Plague Splitting Grenade. Our remaining points we put into Con. The 150 Con perk is the equivalent of 2 Resil, so it's also essential. And we just spend our remaining 15 points in Con, as we don't really need additional damage when we have the 200 Strength perk and the 150 Int perk. Optionally, you can drop down to 165 Strength, and instead get the 200 Con perk for additional survivability. Although I prefer having the 200 Strength for the passive and additional damage. Next up, let's get into the gear. Our best in slot Void Gauntlet is going to have Keen, Petrifying Scream, and Keenly Jagged. Keen and Petrifying Scream are the two perks that I would consider essential for a purple Void Gauntlet, as the Void Gauntlet is primarily for utility, so you need that 40% disease from Scream, and Keen helps a ton with refreshing your cooldowns on the Void Gauntlet. Keenly Jagged is also an excellent perk, as our Orb of Decay can proc the bleed on people, finishing them off and providing a ton of damage over time on targets that you can't get to immediately. Other potential options for your third perk, if you can't find this exact Void Gauntlet, are going to be Keen Speed or potentially Vicious. Vicious is going to be common, so you can get it for rather cheap, although Vicious doesn't add a lot of damage, so it is significantly worse than Keenly Jagged. This is especially true in our playstyle because we're not going to be hitting clumps with the Orb of Decay. Most of the time we're going to be hitting 1 or 2 targets at most. Your Blunderbuss, first off, you're going to want Flame Attunement. It's the best perk in the game right now. It's mandatory, especially for Blunderbuss. Next perk is going to be Exhaustive Netshot. This perk is extremely good. It's very noticeable if you're on the receiving end of an Exhaustive Netshot. It keeps healers low on stamina and sets up kills very well. Your third perk, I personally prefer Enchanted, although some people do prefer Keenly Empowered for a little bit of extra burst, although I don't find that the uptime on Keenly Empowered is very good at all. So I prefer Enchanted, as you do a lot of basic attack damage, and this is just consistent additional damage on all your basic attacks. Next up, let's move on to our jewelry. You have a couple options for your amulet. The Champion's Amulet is free, and it is very good, especially for this build. Other options would be to potentially drop Shirking Empower and take up either Thrust Protection or Slash Protection if you do have a best in slot amulet, but otherwise this amulet is extremely good. For your ring, you're going to want Fire Damage, Invigorated Punishment, and Hardy. These rings are pretty expensive, but it's pretty essential to have all 3 of these perks. This ring is going to be your biggest upgrade. For your earring, you're going to want Refreshing Toast and Purifying Toast. Your third perk can be a few different options. I prefer Nimble for a little bit of stamina regen, but you can also go with Refreshing or something else if you prefer that. Now let's move on to our armor. Nullifying Oblivion is an absolutely essential perk. It's critical to the Void Gauntlet. Diminishing Orb is worth the perk slot. I'll get into this a bit later in the video, but it does provide a ton of utility, even if it's not quite as obvious as Nullifying Oblivion. We also take Plague Splitting Grenade. Although it's only 15% Plague, it's still worth the perk, as it's very good because it's paired with a ability that does a ton of damage, and people that are low health generally need heals. So it's a very good perk. It's worth the armor perk. For our remaining perks, we are of course going to prioritize survivability. For this, we go 5 out of 5 Resilient, at least 4 Freedom, as this build is all about positioning properly, and Freedom allows you to do just that, as it gets you out of all those little micro snares and slows that are really prevalent in wars from things like Gravity Well, Ice Shower, Screams, etc. Now, I personally run 5 out of 5 Freedom, as it does make a noticeable difference for getting you out of those little snares as quickly as possible. As far as your third perk, you only have a couple slots left after getting all this, so I just throw on Physical Aversion or Elemental Aversion for a little bit of defense, depending on what you're fighting. For your Heart Rune, you're going to want to run either Detonate or Stoneform. Both of these are excellent Heart Runes, and you're going to want to swap them depending on the situation. Now let's get into the weapon trees. For Void Gauntlet, we take Scream, Oblivion, and Orb. Essence Rupture and Baleful Tether just aren't very good abilities for PvP, and as this isn't an int build, we don't run Void Blade either. These are just all the good passives in the left tree. We skip Void Collar, as we are primarily using the Blunderbuss rather than the Void Gauntlet, so Void Collar just really isn't going to activate at all. In the right tree, we pick up Refreshing Harvest so that we can right-click for some cooldown reduction when needed, and we pick up Mending Evasion as we just have a free point, and this is a little bit of healing. For your Blunderbuss, you're going to want to take every point in Shrapnel Blast, just the first 3 points in Netshot. This is mainly for the 7-second slow duration. It's not much of a slow, but it does pair with the 200 strength perk for additional damage on any target that you hit, so it's worth the perk. We also take Unload for a little bit of extra burst. I know some people prefer Double Down, but Unload is very good for this build. I think it's better for more burst. In the right tree, we take Future Planning for a little bit of cooldown reduction, On a Roll for some Fortify, all points into Splitting Grenade for the burn, which does a ton of damage over time, and then we go down to Last Chance for the 50% Fortify, so that this build does have a little bit of survivability. It's important to remember that Last Chance only works when you have your Blunderbuss out and active, so if you are caught in a CC chain, make sure you swap to your Blunderbuss so that Last Chance can activate, and you don't swap weapons until you're out of immediate danger, as that will cause the Last Chance buff to fall off. Now, speaking of survivability, let's move on to the general playstyle of this build. Now, you might initially think that this build doesn't have a lot of survivability, as it doesn't have those typical tools like Defy Death, Riposte, Entomb, etc. But it does actually have a good amount of survivability if you play it correctly. Now, your first survival tool, it might be somewhat surprising, but it is actually Oblivion. Oblivion gives you 15 stamina every second, it applies Weaken, and it boosts your own damage so that you can kill people before they kill you. If you get jumped by a melee and you put Oblivion down, you're going to have a much higher chance of staying alive. Our next survival tool is Netshot. It's a bit more obvious as to how you should use it, but it's important to always be aware of the cooldown as well as your stamina bar so that you have the Netshot up when you need it. Particularly useful when you're out of stamina or when there's a melee on you and you know that your rolls are not going to give you very much distance. Netshot is an instant escape tool. It's very good, and it's important to always be aware of when you're going to need it. As this is a pseudo support build, you have the added capability of being able to peel your teammates extremely well as well. Simply scream people off of your teammates, which is very effective, especially if they're another light melee. They are left very vulnerable after you scream them. You can also simply press Oblivion, which deletes all of their empower. It makes them even more vulnerable and gives your teammates additional stamina as well, 15 stamina every second. This can easily turn the tides of a fight in your favor, as they've just wasted a bunch of their cooldowns and didn't manage to get a kill. Now, you can of course always play this build solo, but I find that it's exponentially more effective when you're actually playing off your teammates like this. You can set up kills for your teammates via Netshot or Scream, or you can support their kills by using your high burst or by simply pressing Oblivion for them. As these next few clips play out, note how I'm using my abilities to support my teammates to make it much more likely that they're actually going to get the kills that they're setting up. As a reminder, nullifying Oblivion removes all of the enemy's Fortify buffs while simultaneously empowering all of your teammates. Now let's cover each of our abilities to determine how to get the absolute maximum effectiveness out of them. First off, Orb of Decay is going to be used for poke, securing kills, resetting cooldowns, and for the diminishing orb effect. In this clip, I throw an Orb of Decay right as Defy Death activates, cutting the duration in half and securing the kill well before they expect it. Your Petrifying Scream is going to be best used during the second half of a roll animation, or immediately after someone's dodge, as most people aren't going to consecutively dodge multiple times in a row unless they're low on health or they feel like they're in imminent danger of death. It is very important that you do hit your screams, as that is the main setup potential for kills with this build. Your primary targets are going to be healers or anyone in light armor. Even though they're more likely to run freedom, you're also much more likely to secure a kill, and they're much more vulnerable while they're snared. Keep in mind that anyone below half health will be snared for an additional full second. If you do get the opportunity to hit 2 people with your scream, that is the best case scenario, and you always want to take that opportunity. It's very likely that somebody somewhere is going to be able to make a play off of your double scream. We already covered the defensive usage of Oblivion a bit, but to reiterate, it can be used as an offensive tool when a melee jumps you to guarantee that you get the kill on them. You can also use it very effectively to follow up on gravity wells. Everyone in there is going to be nullified, and it buffs your teammates' gravity well damage. And finally, you can use it to counter Hatchet. Deleting Berserk or deleting Defy Death are both extremely effective uses. Now to show you the reason why we run the Exhaustive Netshot perk on the Blunderbuss itself. You want to be using Exhaustive Netshot on high priority targets such as healers or really anyone in light armor. It makes them much more likely to die, and it lasts for a whopping 8 seconds. Now the optimal usage of Exhaustive Netshot is actually a bit more nuanced. You want to be using it on targets that have low stamina or are already exhausted, as people who are high stamina are going to be dodging, pausing their own stamina regen already, so the exhaust really isn't getting any value if somebody is consecutively dodging or dodging with short intervals between their dodges. Note how oftentimes if I catch the net shot while they're low on stamina, they'll dodge expecting to have another dodge after that, but actually being exhausted. I can also catch it while they're fully exhausted, extending the duration and securing the kill. So if you ever notice somebody that's low on stamina, particularly healers, your top priority needs to be to shoot an Exhaustive Netshot on them as quickly as possible. Just watch their stamina bars and you can see the insane value that this perk gives. Shrapnel Blast is relatively difficult to use properly, especially if you're new to the Blunderbuss, but it can be used very effectively if you just get used to it a bit. The first thing to learn about Shrapnel Blast, primarily through practice, is its effective range, and whether or not you should zoom in or not zoom in. The main benefit of not zooming in is that you retain your wide field of view so that you can see any oncoming danger and so that you can react to any sudden movements by the target you're trying to Shrapnel Blast so you can quickly turn and Shrapnel Blast them effectively. The downside of not zooming in is decreased accuracy and effective range. If you want to Shrapnel Blast someone effectively without zooming in, they need to be right up next to you at point blank range. If they're any further than that, or if you don't expect them to wrap behind you immediately like a melee would, then you're going to want to zoom in for more accuracy and increased distance. Keep in mind that even if you do zoom in, Shrapnel Blast is still a very short range ability, so you won't be able to use it effectively if they're any further than a few meters away. Splitting grenades are one of your primary hard-hitting abilities. There are a couple different ways you can use it effectively, the first of which is a quick follow-up to any distant engagements that you can't get to immediately, especially if they're on multiple targets, such as a gravity well. The second primary usage is to throw your grenades at someone's feet. This is particularly useful on unsuspecting targets or any melee who are actively engaging on you. You can then combo the detonation of the grenades with a Shrapnel Blast for a ton of unexpected burst. It's important to note that if you want Incendiary Burst to work properly, you need to have your Blunderbuss as your active weapon when the grenades explode. Detonate is particularly useful with this build because you can combo it with Oblivion, which gets rid of all their Fortify right before the Detonate goes off and empowers the detonation itself. You can also combo Detonate with a Petrifying Scream, which staggers them right before it goes off so that they can't dodge the damage. If you are running Stoneform in this build, it's less about the Fortify that the ability provides and more so about the CC immunity, which will let you get your entire combo off even on melee targets who are actively attempting to stagger you. As you are lacking grit normally, this rounds off the build really nicely. I'll wrap up this video by showing you the Blunderbuss's highest damaging combo. This combo only works if your target is directly on top of you. To do this combo, you're going to first basic attack, then double tap splitting grenades, then basic attack again, and then shrapnel blast. If you did like this build, be sure to hit the like button and let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Thank you for watching.